My name is Pava LaPere. I'm really excited. Thank you all for coming out here today. First off, I have about 25 minutes to distill a topic that I spent about 4 years working on, and so I'm going to do something that I'm very bad at, which is talk very rapidly. I apologize in advance, and if it ever gets too quickly, please tell me to slow down. Also happy to share the slides or go through this with anybody. But many of you are probably here because you're interested in the process of mapping out your entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'm originally from the Johns Hopkins Accelerators. I got to launch and found that program. And I found one of the hardest parts of my job was helping the students find all of the different resources within, say, the Baltimore innovation ecosystem. I knew all of these accelerators and fundraising programs. They all existed, right? But I couldn't just find one place to send them to that had a list of everything. And I was like, how hard can it really be to build a good resource database, to build a good ecosystem map? And I tell you, 4 years later, a lot of money later, and a lot of fancy AI algorithms, hard. The answer is hard. And so if you guys have tried to map out your entrepreneurial ecosystem and realize that this is a big pain in the ass, you are not alone. And so I want to do my best to distill what I've learned over these past few years to set you guys up to do basic ecosystem mapping, whether that is for your university center or for the broader ecosystem in which you are operating. What we're going to go over here today works just as well for a college center as it does a city entrepreneurial ecosystem, as it does an industry or a sector group, such as the ecosystem for female founders or things of that nature. And so I'm going to speak in kind of broader generalizations, but I'm happy to bring it back down with any examples if that would be helpful. So first off, what is the process of ecosystem mapping? It is really the process of identifying the different assets within your ecosystem to answer the question of who is doing it, right? What are different mentors doing? What is their background? What is this resource for? Who is it for? Who are these different organizations, right? That is what the process is. But the real question is, why do you want to do this, right? You'll know I was not very creative when I named my company. It is called EcoMap, Ecosystem Mapping. That was the name of the Google Drive. It was too long for the full word. And so I refer to it as EcoMap, but we're just saying ecosystem mapping. And we do this because we are trying to create more insight into what is actually going on in the ecosystems around us, right? We say we were trying to create more equitable and accessible ecosystems. But what does that mean? Well, first off, it is very hard to do ecosystem development or program development if you don't actually know what is going on in your ecosystem. If you don't know what organizations exist, if you don't know what resources exist, how are you as center directors supposed to propose new programs to go forward with? So the first part of ecosystem mapping is you're trying to understand what this landscape actually looks like so you can help inform new program development. How should you spend that grant funding? Should you launch another accelerator? Should you launch a peer funding program? A lot of that is based on what already exists within your ecosystem that people can tap into. The second part of ecosystem mapping is to help your stakeholders connect with these different assets, right? So that might be trying to help students find funding programs within the city after they have exhausted the university resources. It might be trying to help people find mentors or advisors in the broader ecosystem or bring in other departments. So when we say stakeholders, we not only mean the students that you work with, but we also mean yourself, who might be good partners to connect with. And a big reason that people do this is that they want to digitize a lot of this process so that they can, make ecosystem platforms that help people navigate this data on their own, right? Commonly referred to as resource databases. But most importantly, and the reason a lot of you guys may be interested in it, is that we are all very familiar with the concept of silos, right? You have this center doing these things, and it's identical to this center who's doing these things, but they didn't know about each other. Maybe the budgets are different, right? And so ecosystem mapping at least lets you see what is the landscape of everything that everyone is doing, and how can we possibly find some cross-cut information to help address the silos that naturally get created, right? When you're doing ecosystem development, you are funded with individual organizations, and people act within their own organizational interest, right? So these silos will naturally develop, and the first step to tearing them down, which is one of the key phases of ecosystem development, is understanding what the hell is happening, right? But you guys know that, that's why you're here. So why is ecosystem mapping hard, right? And the real reason is that gathering all of the data about who is doing what is an absolute pain in the ass, right? Objectively, it is very hard, and it sounds like it shouldn't be. But the first reason is that it's just difficult to go out and define the language that you are going to use, right? I'm sure many of you guys have tried to put together a spreadsheet and you start tagging things and you're like, how many tags can exist? And the answer is a lot, right? So the first struggle is you have to define a common language for how you're going to get in this data. What is an incubator versus what is an accelerator, right? I bet that keeps you up at night. And so you first have to define the shared language, and that is really, really hard because we're asking you to distill the information about people, resources, ventures, organizations into a few tags that are going to be broadly applicable, and that is a hard thing to do. After you do that, you have to go out and gather all of the information about who's doing what. You can either pay an intern to do it, and they're going to take a really long time. You can pay consultants to do it, they're going to charge you a lot of money. You can try to do it yourself, and you're going to be following up with Tom like 5 times over email, being like, just please fill out the survey, and he's not going to do it. And so it's really hard to actually go out, get all of this data, and it's also hard to do it in a standardized manner, right? If you kind of crowdsource it, people are going to define things differently. They're not going to read your glossary of how you defined an incubator versus an accelerator. They're just going to choose what they want to be called, and then that hurts your data fidelity, right? And so it's very hard to get stakeholders to do this for you in a standardized way. And then after you do all of that, your spreadsheet goes out to date, right? A program disappears, a link breaks, and then suddenly what you just invested a bunch of time and money in getting now is kind of worthless, right? It's a point-in-time snapshot of what that ecosystem looked like with a lot of 404 redirects at this point. And so, sorry, tech joke. And if you're trying to do this in a way that is going to be sustainable, right, you need to find a way to keep that data perpetually up to date. Back to the student interns. No one wants to spend resources having a student update a spreadsheet all day, right? And so the data is really the fundamentally hard part of doing ecosystem mapping. And then on top of all of that, once you get this beautiful data, you have to feed it into a platform that lets people navigate it, and that is a whole other cost, budget, time consideration that we're not even going to get into. And so it is a hard thing to do. Thankfully, we have spent about 4 years trying to figure out what are the basic steps for getting this done, right? And so in my brief time, I'm going to go over 3 main aspects of how you can go about this ecosystem mapping process, right? And one of my grievances with conferences is like when you show up to a session and you're like, you're not actually talking about what the title of that session was about, right? And in my title, I say techniques for mapping entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I lied to you. I'm going to be showing you a technique, right? And I'm showing you this technique because we have spent 4 years going through techniques and throwing them out because they were bad, right? But I am always happy to sit down with anybody and walk through kind of what we've learned. But what I'm going to present to you is after a lot of trial and error, when we go out to map a new ecosystem, no matter what that may be, where it might be, this is the process that we follow, right? And so these are the 3 steps. The first is defining your data paradigm, the shared language that you will be using to gather this data. The second is gathering data about port. We'll get into what that is in a moment. And the final one is finding a way to present this data in a way that's going to help you not only understand what it is saying, but also help people navigate it and present it in a way that supplements your data over time, right? That by people interacting with it, it actually improves the quality of a data set, which is a way for you to protect your investment into doing this whole process. So, to start with square one, the first thing you have to do is define a data paradigm. And again, that is a shared language and structure for collecting all different types of data, right? And it seems like it should be easy, right? You guys can take screenshots of this. I'm happy to share with you. We have at this point, Kevin, do you know 100, 200, 400 different terms across industries, verticals, resource types, organization types that we have gone back and forth on to try to find a set of tags that helps relate all different types of data, be that a person, an organization, a resource, etc. And so when we say creating a data paradigm, part of it is this categorical information. But there are 3 structures of a data paradigm. And when I say data paradigm, it's like really big out there. Think about a spreadsheet, right? You have a spreadsheet and your rows are all the different entries in your ecosystem, right? This is a resource, another resource going down. The data paradigm are your columns, right? Your column for URL, your column for description, your column for audience tags. That is what the data paradigm is, as well as the values that you're using to populate those columns. So think about it as if you were filling out a spreadsheet. So when you're making this spreadsheet, there are 3 main categories of data that you want to collect. The first is going to be descriptive data, right? Something that helps you identify what this thing is. So a name, a short description, a sentence, right? A long description. A URL where people can find more information, perhaps contact information. In the nerd world, we call these things plain text fields. And so this is just descriptive data that helps you, like literally, if you're going to read this on a piece of paper, the descriptive data is what's giving you a lot of the context. It helps you ground what that thing is, right? The next and the most important part is the categorical data. And the categorical data is a very, very fancy way of saying tags, right? What are the different tag values that can be associated with any given thing? And that is what you're seeing here. These are tag values. And the reason it is important to define these so carefully is that if you define a good set of tags,
you can then look at your ecosystem in another way. For example, if you're on any of these, this is from the Maryland Entrepreneur Hub, I believe. If you click on any of these, you're going to be taken to a page that shows you every resource in the ecosystem that is tagged funding, every organization in the ecosystem that provides funding, every person who says they have skills in funding, and every venture who needs funding, right? And so you'll note that that wasn't a perfectly grammatical sentence. I am not a person who knows funding. I know fundraising, right? But these are the kind of trade-offs that you have to make in order to get values that are going to cross-cut across these types of data and let you see this ecosystem from a very high level overview, right? So this is a fancy way of saying you need to come up with a list of tags. And when you're looking at tags, there's kind of four main categories that you want to develop. The first is classification, right? What is this type of thing? For resources, that might be resource type, funding, accelerator, incubator, technical assistance, right? For an organization, it might be organizational type, technology transfer office, economic development organization, entrepreneur support organization, which is the catch-all we use when we really can't figure it out. And then, so what is this type of thing? The next is the audience. Who is this for, right? Growth startups, SMBs, female founders, right? What is the audience that might want to engage with this thing? These are going to cross-cut industries. These are going to cross-cut demographic groups. This is just essentially saying who might be interested in this thing. And then the purpose. What is this for? Will it help you with fundraising? Will it help you with marketing? Will it help you with growth? Is it something you want for idea stage businesses? Is it something you want for mature stage businesses? So what is the purpose of this thing? And then finally the function, what does it do, right? Provides funding, provides mentorship, and honestly that's just adding provides on top of your other tags, but it's how it helps people really understand it better. And so the reason that you want to spend so much time defining these tags, and we'll take a look at what they look like in a moment, is because, I totally forgot what I was about to say there. The reason you want to spend so much time defining all of these different tags is because tags could actually let you have databases. And this is a lesson that took me a really long time to learn. But when you're building a platform, you want people to go in and say, I want to see funding, right? I want to see female resources for female founders. And you need tag values in order to do that. That's how data structures work. And so if you want a database that people can actually navigate, you need to spend time on your tag values. And then finally, we have the relational information. And the relational information is how does all of these things relate together, right? What organizations provide which resources? Who has used this resource? What mentors have connected together? And so when you lay out all of this information, say on a platform, this is what more or less looks like. At the top, you have your descriptive information. Who is this? A sentence about what it is, what they're doing, their name, their email. Then you have the categorical information. What are all of the tags? What categories do they fall into? And then finally, you have the relational information, right? What organization provides this resource? What resources does this organization provide? What companies has this mentor worked with? These are reference fields for anybody who is a data fan, right? And so these are the main categories or the main columns that you're going to want in the spreadsheet that you are collecting this data into. So now on to the fun part, right? Actually collecting that data into a given structure. Also, all of these screenshots are taken from the same website. It's online. You guys can see. You can steal our tags straight up. We have spent a lot of time developing them, but go ahead. They're pretty robust. And so the next step, and this is why I'm okay, go ahead, steal our tags, because the absolute pain in the ass part is collecting all of this data, right? And so when you have to go out and collect the ecosystem data, you have to go identify all of the assets and then tag them, extract the information about them. And so there's a lot of tools. If any of you guys went to the no-code session, I'm sure they might have introduced the concept of Airtable. I am happy to nerd out on all the different data collection methods, but just like Airtable. If you haven't looked it up already, look up Airtable, it's great. And so now to finally tell you guys who these things we're talking about, right? When you're trying to go out and collect information about all the different assets, what are those assets? So there are a bunch of different data types in a given ecosystem, but there are four main ones that we deal with, and we call these VORP, right? And so VORP stands for ventures, organizations, resources, and people, right? Ventures are obviously the things that people are building. They might be small businesses, they might be growth startups, they might be side hustles. It's really, really hard to put them into buckets, right? So we call them ventures. And that is the first thing. They are these entities that are operating within the ecosystem, right? The next are organizations. Now, these are the organizations who are working on the ecosystem, right? These are your entrepreneurship centers, your technology transfer offices, your economic development agencies, right? The organizations that are working to grow the ecosystem. These two are actually very similar, and on our backend data structure, they have the same data type, but we still split them out because they are easier to think about in this kind of binary way. Who is working on the ecosystem, who is within the ecosystem, and don't think too much about that because it's gonna So they're very similar and a lot of them overlap, right? And one organization might be different functions. Like we're currently working on a project to map out a big industry segment, and a big corporation is a business, right? But it also provides resources into that ecosystem. So it's both a business and an organization. So if you struggle with that distinction, you're not alone. We spend a lot of time on it. The next are resources, and this is where a lot of people forget to draw the line when they go out and collect this information. I ran an accelerator program, right? That accelerator was housed within a university entrepreneurship center. The University Entrepreneurship Center, fast forward you, was the organization, and it provided the Spark Accelerator, a resource. It provided the Fuel Accelerator, a resource. It provided an Ignite Fund, that was a funding program. So resources are the programs, tools, workshops that organizations provide, right? And sometimes the overlap is one-to-one, venture capital firms, right? They are a VC firm, and despite what all of the GPs might say, their real value is funding, right? They're going to be providing the one resource of funding, but they are also an organization. So sometimes there's going to be that one-to-one overlap between organizations and the resources that they provide. But otherwise, you really want to think of the resources as the individual programs that you all offer. And it becomes a lot easier to define a data paradigm for those instead of trying to find one that fits both defining organizations and resources. And then finally, we have the people, right? Who are the individuals that actually make up these ecosystems? The people who lead the centers, the founders who are running the companies. Those are relatively straightforward. They're the individuals within the ecosystem. And so these are the main types of ecosystem assets that you guys want to identify as you go out and try to map out your entrepreneurial ecosystem. After you do that, you have to find a way to actually display and utilize this data, right? There is nothing worse than investing a large time and money that it takes to get this data set for it to sit there and rot in your Google Drive, right? You really want to find a way to present it and utilize it in a way that is not only going to help people navigate the ecosystem and help them connect with these things and help you understand the landscape, but also ideally in a way that adds to your data set over time, right? By the nature of people using the platform that you create, they are giving you more data, they are improving your tags, they are giving you the relational information, which can be very hard to gather. Like, our whole company operates on using very fancy algorithms to extract a web footprint of these things, right? But that web footprint doesn't tell you when I get into a new accelerator unless I post it somewhere. So by creating a platform that allows people to provide you that information, you grow the quality of your data set over time. And that is probably the number one best way to protect your investment. We'll talk a little bit about that. But the first thing to know is that when we think about ecosystems, ecosystems are networks. And many people, myself included, the first time I tried to build an ecosystem map for the city of Baltimore, I put it into a network graph, right? And that was the dumbest thing I have ever done. Because if you wanted to say, all right, I want to understand Albuquerque's entrepreneurial ecosystem, and someone handed you that shit, right? You'd be like, thanks, no thanks, right? So this may be how the data actually looks on the back end in the real world, right? But this is not how you want to present the data. So if you were thinking of doing it in a network graph, mind map type of way, two reasons not to do it. One, it is not very easy to navigate, even if it is intuitive to understand. This is a network, that is what networks look like when you turn them into computers, but nobody wants to navigate through that. The second thing is that unless you have a background in data science, it is very hard to get information out of network graphs. And so if there are many softwares that will let you build up network graphs and these network things, I would not recommend using them. I would use a spreadsheet, because spreadsheets, especially like Airtable, they allow you to have the relational data that underpins network graphs, and they allow you to copy and paste that data wherever you want. And so I would avoid trying to do a network graph thing, because no one wants to navigate an ecosystem like that. They want to navigate an ecosystem with simple questions, with simple tags that let them find what they need quickly, right? That is why resource databases are so popular, because somebody can go in and say, I want to see economic development agencies that work with female founders providing funding in the city of Baltimore. That is the question that I have. And that is the type of way you want to present this data. And so it doesn't matter on the back end, it's a fancy network. You want to present it in a simple platform. And when you think about creating a platform, you want to think about adding on features to it that actually promote the engagement and the usage of this platform over time. I'm sure many of you have found yourself in a situation where you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to a custom software development agency to build a very pretty website, and then nobody uses it, right? No one comes back, they stop engaging with it, they look at it, there's a lot of reasons for that, and I could dive into those over time. But when you're thinking about creating a platform and kind of evaluating different solutions on the market, you want to think about two things. One, what are features that help people navigate the data that you just collected, right? How do I find these resources? How do I connect with these organizations? Those are directories. But you also want to think about features that help you understand what's going on in your ecosystem. So discussion forums, event calendars that people can add to, news feeds, matching and recommendation tools, things that help you by the essence of people using that platform and adding their events to the event calendar or posting a job, they are giving you data about what exists. And the final thing to think about, which is a very important consideration that's very technical and hard to get into, is the process of user onboarding, right? And this is the fancy way of saying when somebody signs up to use the platform that you've created, you want to ask them specific questions. You want to ask them questions about data that is very hard to otherwise get, right? Why are you here? What is your biggest struggle, right? What are the primary ways we can help you? And so when you're evaluating platforms, you want to find one that lets you customize that user onboarding experience. Because what a country, we did not Ghana though, but like what a state is wondering about the users on its platform is different than what a university center might be wondering about a student, right? So you really want to find a way to kind of customize the user onboarding process so that you can get data that matters to your center, right? Okay, I just went over 4 years of work in like 20 minutes, and I have 5 minutes left, and I want to answer any questions that I might be able to about that very complicated process. I will also say that was a lot of information. I am happy to have an individual conversation with anybody about these things, or even walk you through your center.
If it's a collective regional